to another episode of the Healers of the World podcast with your host, Robyn On Earth. What really captures my heart and my mind is magic, and the world is full of it. As I continue to deepen my own walk with the beauty way, I experience more and more magic, and my heart longs to live in a world where collectively we can embrace more of the magic that lies just behind the veil, in the subtle but perceptible hues all around us. So when I come across individuals who have been initiated and gifted into being the bridge between ordinary and non-ordinary reality, I want to share their stories and their work, because I truly believe that even in just hearing them, our propensity to welcome magic into our own lives is amplified. So before I introduce you to our next guest today, please just remember that I receive no remuneration for this podcast, and so your support in liking, following, and sharing episodes that you have found useful will correspond into much appreciated energy to keep us going. If this work is creating value, guys, I need your support for it to continue doing so, and I thank you. So, about our guest today. This is actually our second attempt to record this due to technical issues the first time round. So I'm even more excited than usual about the gnosis that I know is going to come through in today's episode. I first heard about Matthew Ryan on the spiritual grapevine many moons ago, and have since experienced his medicine in one-on-one sessions that have created deep support and understanding on my own journey. Matthew is a visionary guide and healer, and he lives in New Mexico. And these past 2 decades of his life have centered around the development of his unique energy healing modality called GammaWave healing, as well as intense journey work with our plant medicine allies. The culmination of his journey came into being in 2018, when he met Rhoda and Zelkhia, his dear soul sisters in South Africa. And since then, Matthew has hosted retreats in South Africa, introducing friends and clients from all around the world to the life-changing protocol developed by Rhoda and Zelkhia, which he believes is the most effective and comprehensive cleanse and activation protocol on the earth. Exciting. Matthew's story is just fascinating in terms of how he was initiated into the GammaWave healing protocol. And I know that many of you will understand this. But as in our personal journeys, as our non-human allies and guides begin to step forward, and as our personal galactic history starts to reveal itself, it's so supportive to find someone who can not only help ground this experience, but also further open the veils of communication. And in my experience, the frequency that Matthew holds is razor sharp in its alignment, and it's very sincere in its expression. And so I'm excited to give Matthew the space to share his remarkable story and to see where the energy is going to guide us in our chat today. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving it another try to connect, as we, it's quite remarkable. We're speaking from about 10,000 miles or 9,000 miles apart from each other, and we can still pull off a video call. So maybe I'm grateful for the technology when it behaves.
Yeah. And also, especially given that both you and I live quite remotely. So everything crossed this works today. I'm positive it will. Matthew, you've got such a remarkable story of how you came into your gifts and how you were initiated into your work as a healer. And so I'd really love to just hear what you are willing to share with our listeners today.
Absolutely. And thank you. It's a very interesting story for sure. Aspects of it for sure also are remarkable. I've had a very interesting and well-varied life, especially on this path of awakening, this path of remembering. I would say, like people always ask me, how did this get started? The simple way to describe it would be there are certain gifts that I had that I came in with as a child. My own experience, I was just having a normal childhood. I didn't realize that anything that I was experiencing was in any way special. And though my mother had a very strong intuition and maybe some of her like Hungarian blood, we always kind of joke about it, like the gypsy blood from her Hungarian side. But she wasn't a healer or anything like that. She was a mom and was raising me and my 2 sisters. And so, there was no environment to reinforce anything, really kind of beyond the ordinary. But as I was a child, I was having a lot of different experiences that I look back on as being indicators that maybe I was kind of destined for this work. I would say, several experiences as a child being able to communicate with animals where I had lucid conversations, like telepathic conversations, whether it be with dogs, I grew up with dogs, with wild animals. I'm having an experience walking up upon a herd of elk, which elk are one of the largest types of deer that live in North America, very large, and having a full conversation with this herd of elk when I was alone up kind of in the woods. And, things like that. Had a lot of dreams that would come true. And when I was young, particularly, I'd say from probably 5 years old onwards, I would have dreams that would come true. And it kind of like a deja vu, but would play out in extreme detail. And it used to actually frighten me. And so I would try to change things. I would try to alter the outcome unsuccessfully. I never was able to alter the outcome. And I think that even scared me more. It was almost like I had no free will in what was happening to me. Growing a little bit older, I think it was really started kind of around the time of puberty, like 12, 13 years old, maybe once or twice when I was younger. But I started having a series of out-of-body experiences where I would wake up and be totally disoriented and even like try to move around the room and I couldn't find the door. Woke up once and I was on the ceiling and then like it snapped me back awake into my body. But I had these series of experiences that again came naturally and automatically to me. And then I learned as an adult, that these were things that people were trying to cultivate and but it came naturally to me. So I know that there were certain abilities that I came in with. But as I was growing up then, I was just kind of a normal American boy, playing sports and, interested in girls and maybe thinking about college, down the road. And just kind of went along my normal trajectory of life. But then when I was 19 years old, a sophomore in college, second year of college, I had a series of experiences that were some of it kind of traumatic, where I had knee surgery, a series of injuries. I played football for my university, American football, and had a series of injuries that really kind of sent me into a depression. And after my surgery later on in that year, had an experience with my father while we were camping in the north woods of Ontario, Canada. And we were fishing on a fishing trip together. And my dad had a heart attack while we were totally alone. And that was, kind of a come to God moment, if you will, where I really recalibrated the path that I had been on, which was kind of self-destructive. I was very depressed at the time and was drinking alcohol heavily. And I really recalibrated onto a life then of meaning. And I remember I had a very clear conscious. Right. So, childhood, after having all of these kind of bizarre and unordinary reality experiences, life normalized. I ended up having, my teenage years were pretty normal, really into sports and looking forward to college. And once I got to college, though, I ended up having kind of a challenging time when I was 19 in my second year of college. I had a series of experiences that really recalibrated me. I was in college. I partied a lot. Had a lot of fun. I played sports for my university. I played American football. But then I had a series of injuries while playing football that really kind of sent me into a depression. And I began drinking really heavily and was really not really a pleasant person to be around. And in that state then, in recovering from a surgery, I had to have ACL reconstruction on my knee. And after that, I was in my recovery and I went fishing and camping with my father in northern Canada. We went up into Ontario and we were out in the middle of nowhere and my father had a heart attack while we were, in the middle of nowhere. And we, that was a moment where it really was kind of like a return to God moment. I mean, I prayed authentically really hard and my father ended up making it through. But in that moment, though, there was a real recalibration where I really dedicated myself into more of a life of meaning because I realized I was just kind of spinning out of control at that point. And, it took Took a little bit of time then for that to really land, but I was kind of pointed in a new direction. And so I began into my early 20s, after I got out of college, I was exploring esoteric things. I synchronistically called to learn about the Pleiadians in this book called Bringers of the Dawn. Pulled me off of a street in Manhattan. I was living in New York City, and like pulled me onto a bookshelf and picked up the Bringers of the Dawn, and it was like reading my own story in a way. It was super familiar. I discovered Carlos Castaneda and really got into shamanism and into the Toltec worldview and began really understanding that our reality is composed of energy and that we are energetic beings. And so all of this was, becoming the foundation then of the work that I would do later. I ended up then, falling in love and meeting my at that time my girlfriend became my wife. Now we've split up some years ago, but she grew up in Taos, New Mexico, and so when we met in Los Angeles, we moved to Taos, New Mexico, which, if people aren't familiar, New Mexico is one of the United States that is in the American Southwest. So it's primarily desert, but there are really large mountains, tall mountains up over 4,000 meters in elevation, big ski resort. And so it's really a beautiful contrast between alpine environment and then what we call high desert. And it's a very spiritual place in the United States. There's a very strong population of Native Americans that are here that were never relocated by the US government. So there's like a continuity of history that's here that you don't see anywhere else in the United States. And it's considered a vortex like Sedona or Mount Shasta or like Uluru in Australia. It's one of the primary energy nodes, and it's one of the main nodes for the entire continent of North America. And so coming here, then I was really excited to begin exploring, like especially the shamanism. But what I didn't quite expect was, a few months after living here in 2004, I went for a hike up in the mountains behind our house. We lived in the mountains, and I went for a hike up into the mountains alone one day in April of 2004. And while, I sat down and rested for a while and just listening to the sounds of the forest. And when I finished and I was ready to get home, stood up and I put on my little Camelback, like water backpack, and out of the sky came down a UFO, portaled in, like it just kind of appeared and went from a very high frequency sound to a very low frequency sound. So like as it was getting closer to me, it went from like a really, really low and was hovering directly above me, above the trees. And it was really incredible because there were like waves of energy that were pulsating off of the craft, like almost like standing in the ocean, being like hit with waves of water. And it was the lowest frequency I'd ever been exposed to in my life. The only thing close that I've ever experienced to this would be scuba diving when the humpback whales are singing, and you feel that wave go through your entire body. Every cell in your body is lit up, and that's exactly what this was, except it was coming off of the spacecraft. And so as I'm looking up at it, it kind of shaped like an almond. It was like pointy on one side and like on the front, and then like a rounded end, so kind of like an almond nut, totally chrome silver, without any seams or anything. There were not like you would see on an aircraft with like panels and rivets. It was completely seamless. And of course, I'm looking at the bottom of it, so all that I saw was the bottom, and it was kind of shaped like a V-shaped hull of a boat. There was like a center line ridge, and around it, though, around the craft, there was this distortion field. It was like kind of phasing in and out where I could and couldn't see it, kind of like in the movie The Predator, that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. It was like it looked like it was cloaked. I came to find out later that it was a gravity field, and it was bending light around the craft, and so I could see it and I couldn't see it. But so this craft drops down and is hovering directly above me, right above the treetops, maybe 100 feet or like 30 meters above me. And my immediate thought was, wow, that's a low frequency. And then my second thought was, holy cow, I'm going to get taken. And there was no fear, which is really interesting. It was more like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening to me right now. And pretty quickly, when I had that second thought, I'm going to get taken, I heard, no, they're not taking me, they're talking to me. And so I stood there and I just looked up at it and I was trying to tune in kind of like my rudimentary way at that time. And I realized I wasn't getting any information. So I just stopped and I stood there trying to be as present as I could. And so the craft, as it was oriented, the pointy bit was kind of pointing towards my back, from like my front to my back. And after about 25 seconds, I don't think it was quite 30 seconds, the craft rotated its orientation and then it flew away from me to my left up a canyon. And so it was immediately like out of my line of sight because I could only see it just through the treetops. But as it left my visual line of sight, the engine was still, with these pulsating waves. And, due to the Doppler effect, I could tell that it was moving away from me. Like the frequency was changing, the duration was just like an ambulance driving away from you. And it ended up, it was like following the contour of the elevation above the trees. And so I could tell that because it was rising in elevation and then it went behind a ridge line. And as soon as it dropped behind the ridgeline, all of the intensity dropped like 90%, let's say. And then it came back into what would be line of sight as it was like gaining elevation and cleared the ridgeline. And then all the intensity came back, but it was much further away from me now. So it did this a few times. It had that kind of change where I was losing the line of sight. And then eventually it just completely turned off. Like it stopped. There was no more sound. And I just stood there and I'm like listening, and the forest was completely silent. And that's something like the only time you ever hear a completely silent forest around us is like if there's a gunshot or something like that, and everything goes quiet. So it was totally, totally silent. And within 5 or 6 seconds, all the noises came back like no big deal. And so then I realized, oh, wow, I was just like the entire forest was quiet. And then I just started laughing, going, what was that? Like, what just happened? And I thought, well, I guess it's time to go home now, and ended up hiking back home. So, that experience at the time, it didn't really, like freak me out. It wasn't something like outlandish, like I can't believe that. No, I'd known my entire life that UFOs were a real situation. It just was a little surprising, that I had that encounter. But I didn't really think anything of it and just kind of kept on going on with my life. And in the few years after that, things really began to change with me where I learned an energetic healing modality called theta healing. That theta healing really just helped me to open up my own inherent abilities, and all of these healing abilities began to unfold. Now, fast forward into the year 2009. So that was 2004. And fast forward to 2009, and it's like I've got small children at this point. I'm married. My wife and we own this gallery. And I started then kind of exploring doing healing work and like doing readings for people. I'd been working with the tarot at this point for several years. And in 2009, I did a series of past life regressions with a very gifted facilitator, friend of mine named Stacy. And Stacy, in one of our very first sessions, she guided me back into that moment of the close encounter. She was like directed to take me back into that moment. And so I'm under hypnosis and we go through the experience, and I learned for the first time what really had happened. And so what was revealed was that on board that craft, there were two beings, and both of these beings were from the star system Alpha Centauri. So if people are unfamiliar, the Centauri constellation, Proxima Alpha and Beta Centauri are the closest stars to our solar system. They're a little over 4 light years away. And Alpha Centauri is this ascended civilization that is there. They are human beings, but they look like aliens to us. They're very tall. They have like a blue-green kind of skin tone with these like what look like bioluminescent tattoos, almost as if like a Maori tattoo or something, but like illuminated from within in this like electric blue, kind of like bioluminescent algae that you see in the ocean, at night. And so this like blue, blue glyphs on their skin, and they have a large elongated head. And so they kind of look like, your classic, like big head alien with like kind of a human face and two arms, two legs. And so, I was shown this race of beings and that this is who was on board the craft. And the primary being on board the craft became my main guide. So from this regression forward, I was in telepathic communication with the being that had been on board this craft. And what I learned was that this was like an appointment when I had my close encounter. These beings they were on Earth approximately 63,000 years ago during what we would call Lemuria or Mu, the ancient civilization that was around the Pacific and Indian Oceans. And they were based in what is now Peru. So they were pyramid builders. They built these massive pyramid structures in Peru that we now believe are mountains. They're totally covered and forested, and we think that they're mountains, but it's actually a pyramid. And these beings were like spiritual ambassadors to the earth at that time. And what had happened was that this being, she was a female, was like we would call like a high priestess or something like that, kind of a scientist and a spiritual leader combined. And she had learned that there was going to be a moment in time in the future of the earth that would require humanity to awaken and to throw off the shackles of an enslavement that had been occurring for, going all the way back to the Anunnaki, 200,000 plus years ago. So in that moment of learning that information, she came forward in time. Their craft that they have, the technology that they possess, they can move anywhere in time. They're highly dimensional. And she basically came forward in time looking for her frequency signature, like a DNA marker that was me. So it's like, she was like a past life incarnation of mine, which I had no idea in the moment. And she basically came forward through time, found me, they found my frequency signature, which matched hers, and then they bombarded me with a very high frequency sound, like a phaser, kind of like how a laser is a coherent light wave. It's like a coherent sound wave, way beyond hearing. This is like dolphin frequency, high frequencies. And so while I was standing there looking up at this craft thinking they're talking to me, they were working on my DNA and facilitated some activations. Once they did those activations, they left and kind of left me to my own devices. And so that piece of information coming in 2009 like opened up everything for me then. And then that really took me into developing my own modality. And it was actually this guide which gave me the name GammaWave Healing, as I had checked in with her at one point and said, hey, I've got this healing ability that's coming online. What do I call this? And she said, if you need a name, you can call it GammaWave Healing. And I said, well, why GammaWave Healing? And she told me that when I go into that state to facilitate the healing work, that I'm accessing a gamma brainwave state. And so it was a few months after that, I ended up having a session on an EEG and measuring my brain activity. And I did a healing session on myself while I was connected to this brain technology. And it registered that I was in a gamma state when I was doing the healing work. So, that was a really cool confirmation, corroborating what was happening. But yeah, that was basically the beginning of it, and the seed for where I'm at now. And then so that being from 2004 to now we're in 2025, many years of development and learning and growing and activations. And then you mentioned the work with the plant medicines, and that also through the intervening years, that all created a lot of influence in opening me and learning who I am and what I'm here to do. Yeah, that's the gist of it.
Amazing, Matthew. While I was listening to you, I actually wanted to ask you, do you think that this guide is an ancestor? And then you answered that question, because I remember hearing a really interesting theory. It was something on Netflix, a documentary around aliens, where the scientists actually mapped out the way that our brain structure and faces would change into the future. given the trends of how we had changed from the past. And in the future, we look like the classic sort of greys or ETs that we see today. And he had actually presented this theory that, these extraterrestrial beings are often versions of ourselves that are time traveling. So I just found that, it's just a theory that I've heard before, but I found that quite interesting because while he was speaking, that was my instinct, was this is you. This is you in another moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah, it since that initial piece of information, I did several other regressions and had opportunity to see three total lifetimes where I had been incarnated into this Alpha Centauri civilization. So what I've since have learned, in more recent time, my first experience doing the cleanse with Rhoda and Zelkhia in South Africa, that was in 2018. During that experience, I was given information that in more detail about that, so that I had incarnated into Alpha Centauri civilization because they were a bridge at a frequency level, at a very high frequency, and I was able to come in through that frequency and then incarnate into the earth and to carry those codes that they had. This is kind of like our starseed story. When people talk about being a starseed, I've learned that I'm deeply involved in those types of programs of coming into a world in order to help facilitate a change. And in this case, the moment that we're in right now in 2025, this is the moment of the big shift, and it's the culmination for so many of us in lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of incarnating here and learning and mapping the environment, mapping the distortion, mapping the infiltrations so that we can break it all down. And so it's an exciting culmination moment right now for sure, and I think a lot of us are carrying these types of codes from other civilizations.
So I have so many questions about your story in particular, but I'm going to loop back to that because you talk about this big shift in 2025. And, I am so sure that there are going to be people listening to this that understand how I feel. For those of us that are tuned into this, I feel like I'm watching a balloon pop so slowly. It's like, it's particularly in the last 12 months, focusing on mundane reality and kind of like putting the cogs in place to, keep building my career and keep building my business while I'm like watching this balloon pop has been incredibly frustrating. And at times I wonder if I'm going crazy. And so I would love to hear from you, Matthew, because, you got insight that many of us would not have. I mean, how are you perceiving this shift?
Yeah, I feel much the same way as you. I like that metaphor of the balloon popping. And it's kind of like, even if we were to think like maybe you just blow up the balloon a little bit and maybe it was like painted in a certain way or like, painted with all these like little lines representing the people. And then as you inflate the balloon, it's like stretching and stretching and stretching. And I absolutely am feeling that. It's quite the moment. And there really, as I talk with a lot of my friends that, especially friends that I know that are really tracking this kind of moment, that are paying attention to the energy, everybody is experiencing this. A lot of people call it actually a squeeze. It feels almost like it's going the opposite direction, that we're being compressed. And what it seems to be is it's a mechanism of a couple of different factors. First, there is the star beings, the presence of the star beings, which if we were to see these craft uncloaked, it would shock the entire world. I mean, that they would be covering the sky. And where I live, I see a lot of them. We walk outside at night. You look up in the sky. There are orbs going all over the place. Like they're everywhere around the world right now. And so their presence, when we bring in these civilizations that are near us, but a little bit at a higher frequency, and then you bring in other civilizations that are like entire octaves higher than us, the presence of that energy is impressed upon this world. And that's the dominant resonant frequency then coming into our world, which then ejects discordant frequencies out of the world, right? Which means us. It means it brings things up right now. So just by being in the presence, the increased presence of all of these beings, these trillions of eyes that are upon us right now, that is facilitating this shift, right? But then simultaneously, there is the ascension wave of energy that has come in from the great central sun of the Milky Way galaxy and is an impulse of energy. It's like a scalar wave type energy that was sent out that has hit our world and is simultaneously the world is being impacted by what is called the galactic current sheet, which again emanates out of the great central sun. And it's like a wave or like a spinning pinwheel of energy that moves through the entire galaxy. And every 12,000 years, another one of these waves hits us and drives us through a process of ascension or a process of this phase shift. So that energy is also simultaneously impacting our star. It's impacting every planet in our solar system is undergoing climate change, which is an indicator that a lot of, what's being used by the control matrix to explain the changes in our world is it's garbage. Honestly, there are climatic changes that are occurring, but they're not being driven by CO2 from people's tailpipes. It's being driven by the energy that is moving through, and it is creating this phase shift. So as we're going through this experience right now, so many people are having these experiences, which would be like deja vus, like having these really synchronistic experiences dropping in, having memory come up, reconnecting memory to experiences that have been compartmentalized in our memory. Lines are changing. This is something a lot of people report is like distortions around time, where I used to see this all the time in the last several years. Is I do my first appointment every morning starts at 10 o'clock at local time. And I would go, I'm about to have my appointment. I look in the kitchen at the clock and it's 9:51. I go into the bathroom and wash my hands and I walk back out and it's 9:57. I'm going, well, wait a second, that took me 30 seconds. Like, where did those other 5 minutes go? And it's not like a missing time thing. It's like recalibrations that are occurring in the timeline, and having memories drop in from other lifetimes or like other experiences that are not this experience, but they're memories. And so a memory comes in and I'm like, whoa, I just remembered something, but that's not even this life. So like a lot of those types of experiences are happening. People are noticing things like the frequency shift by looking at the natural environment, looking at the sky, and the sky is bluer and the clouds are more crisp, and the colors at sunset are just outrageous. Or seeing like new species of life, like I've been seeing these little, they look like miniature honeybees that are like crystalline iridescent greens and blues and yellow, and I've never seen these things before living in this area of the world. So there are a lot of things like that that are all happening. And if you don't have a grounded basis, within yourself, within a practice of being able to reconnect and ground yourself, then I think we're seeing a lot of that as this like frenetic energy that is spinning people out, where people are literally having breakdowns within their mental structure. And as the ideologies continue to be shattered as part of this process, I think that's only going to get more pronounced. So it really is important for us, to have some type of a practice or more of like a spiritual basis, whether that be your church or meditation or Tai Chi or whatever it is, so that we can drop inside and hit that still point within ourselves as this entire reality is just like spinning like crazy around us.
Yeah, I find this so fascinating. I have written a book that is almost complete and did a lot of studying of how this time was foretold by different traditions. So from ancient India, we've got the yugas, and one could see this as a shifting out of one yuga into another yuga. But if you study the precession of the equinox, it's more like 13,500 years. So, we're talking approximately a similar time frame. So the precession of the equinox is a 26,000 year cycle, give or take. And for half of that, we're moving towards the photonic belt of the universe,
Yeah.
which is obviously connected to how the central sun impacts us. And then for the other
Yes.
13,000 years, we're moving away from it. Now, what particularly interested me about this when I was researching it is the book that I've written is The Role of the Feminine in Our Collective Ascension. And what has been foretold in or understood in many of the ancient traditions is that when we're moving away from the light, we actually are designed to move into a more patriarchal era and way of thinking, more mind-based as we move away from the heart. I mean, obviously, when I talk about masculine and feminine, I'm not talking about men and women. I'm obviously talking about those energies in us. And that when we start moving towards the light, the feminine, the heart-based technology starts taking over. And so that's another way of describing this, is that we are in the process of moving from a civilization who understands themselves from the mind into a civilization that understands themselves from the heart.
Yes.
And so I find it so fascinating. I mean, it's probably the reason why I started this podcast, because it's such an amazing opportunity to get different individuals to come in here and share their perception of it. But what I would love to hear from you too, Matthew, is how all of this correlates into the choice point. Because obviously in the New Age spiritual community, there's a lot of talk on this choice point, a splitting off, or a new earth and an old earth. Are we going to make it through this choice point, or is this not even a question where we always intended to reincarnate with the earth? So I would just love to hear, what your views on that are.
Yeah, it's a really excellent question. I've actually had several discussions in recent time with some friends about this concept, and I would say, jumping back in time to around 2009, maybe 2010, I remember checking in with my guides at one point, and I said, okay, tell me what's about to happen with the 2012 thing. What really is going on with 2012? And what I was told that yes, we are moving into the density of the photon belt, the density of all of the light that is in this galaxy. We were moving through that area, and that there also in 2012 was an alignment with the galactic core, but also with Alcyon in the Pleiades. And so there was like a harmonic alignment with the primary star, which is kind of like our local central sun, as our star and Sirius are in a binary relationship, and then we are orbiting around the Alcyon area as we orbit in the bigger picture in the Milky Way. And so that whole harmonic connection was going to be like an upload of information, they told me. But then they showed me a kind of like a metaphoric representation of this shift. And what I was shown was that the Earth like holographically fractaled into 6 different Earths. And they were using 6 just to keep it simple. It's actually probably more like 7 billion Earths, right? Like every human being having their own unique lens. But in this, what was shown to me, there were 6 Earths. And they said that each one of those 6 Earths represented a different bandwidth of frequency, of a resonant frequency. And that as we were moving through the shift, people were going to divide into those different bandwidths of frequency. You would vibrate into your resonant frequency bandwidth, and you would be in that bandwidth with other people holding that same resonant frequency. And then there would also be a polarity frequency that you would, in that resonant frequency bandwidth, there would be someone holding the opposite frequency, but they're still matched, right? The polarities were like the yin yang, right? It's like the perfect balance. And so during the years intervening from 2012 until the moment that we're in right now, I was shown that those 5 of the 6 Earths were going to merge back together. They basically, by being in that bandwidth of your frequency, you would accelerate your own growth and healing. It would force you to accelerate through whatever distortions needed to be cleared and pieces to be reintegrated. And as everybody in your bandwidth, in that holographic Earth was going through that, it achieves rapid healing. And then the 5 out of the 6 were going to merge back together into the optimal timeline. And the 6th Earth then was shown to me that would be a place where people, maybe as a result of their programming, their ideological programming, or maybe due to their free will choices of making self-interested choices, that holographic Earth was basically shown that it would be reset back onto another 3D cycle, maybe an entire precession of the equinoxes that they would have to go through a whole other 26,000 year cycle until they could return to a place where that version of the earth was going to be able to clear and heal all of these energies. But the others were going to merge back together. And that's, I think, what we're seeing right now, and this is these discussions I've been having with friends recently, is that we are observing this. It feels like, people are vibrating back into our life that maybe had been kind of removed to the outskirts of our experience as we were working on the resonant frequencies in our life. And so as we're looking through then at this moment, there's no reason for any level of fear or anything like that. There is no fear for me around what this change is going to look like, because everything that I've seen, everything that I have come to know about this moment is that we have moved through all of these changes energetically within ourselves, and those who are just waking up right now, they're catching that wave, and they're being brought very rapidly through this moment. And the optimal timeline that we are on is going to be one where we move through the complete dismantling, visible dismantling of this control structure, what I call the false light matrix that has hijacked the organic ascension timeline. All of that is going to collapse. And what we're left with is then a phase shift into that next higher state of frequency. And so as all the solar activity is happening, all of the geomagnetic shift as we're undergoing this, they call it a geomagnetic excursion, where the magnetic pole moves and even possibly flips 180 degrees. Historically, we see in the geologic record and in the historical record, those types of changes are disasters. It's a cataclysmic event. But we're not on that timeline. That the shift is not going to be a third dimensional cataclysm. It is a phase shift. It's a literal shift in frequency into that next bandwidth, or into, the next octave of frequency. And so I believe that's what we're living out right now. And, maybe one way to understand, what is occurring in this collective experience that has literally never occurred before. And this is how special this moment is that civilizations from all over the entire universe, countless other galaxies, are witnessing what we are moving through in this world, because there's never been a civilization that has gone from like the 3D to the 5D within a span of like 60 years. It's very rapid. This is a process that normally takes 1,000 years of linear development, and we are very rapidly moving through it right now, and it is exactly why we're all here. So yeah, that's what my sense of what's going on around those kinds of changes and the like bifurcation of the Earth frequency. So is that similar to what you felt?
No, there's some new insight there. And it's the first time I've heard this theory on sort of the fractal Earth. And what I love about that is that what that implies is that the choice point is individual rather than collective. And, even if the choice point was collective, we would still be responsible for it. But it really hones in on the responsibility of our personal development, when you explain it in that way. So I really appreciate hearing that. And there's quite a lot to contemplate there. Where my mind goes to is kind of two questions. And the one question is, in terms of the forces that created the hijacking, I mean, refer to these forces as sort of anti-life or non-organic forces, right? There's a lot of talk with more of the original Gnostic teachings coming out around this being an archonic influence, or, what have you. My question is then, what I'm hearing from what you're implying is that what's causing the dissolution of this matrix is actually frequency, right? It's like as the frequencies, the false matrix just can't hold anymore. And
Yes.
then that makes me move into another question, which is where I wonder why now? Like, why is this happening? This phase shift, is so novel and unique. Is this just a cycle that we don't have memory of? Do you have any insight on sort of the backstory of why our galaxy, why our universe is primed to witness something as novel as what is happening on the Earth? Yeah, just the role of the Earth in this.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that it's a combination. Again, there are natural cycles that we are caught in right now. They're depending on, the sources of science that you're tracking, the real science that's out there right now that is speaking about this galactic current sheet, that's speaking about the magnetic pole reversal and these things. These are cycles that are very regular that can be followed. There's like a cycle and a half cycle, 12,000 years, 1,000 years, and then there's even like quarter cycles inside of that. And so we're seeing multiple cycles coming together, kind of like the Mayan calendar. It's like the Mayan calendar even is like many, many different cycles, and they're all coming together and clicking together. So that is an indicator of like natural rhythms that we're moving through as a cosmos, and especially in our local area. But then there's also this other aspect where, going back into 2000, when was it? Maybe it was around like 2015, 2014, somewhere in there, I think, where I began receiving information that there had been a decision essentially made by Prime Creator, by God, the one Prime Creator at the underlying all of reality in this universe, and that this decision was essentially made to throw off the shackles and throw off all of the frequency suppression and throw off all of the dark magic that had been infiltrated into this world, suppressing this world in the way that it had been for thousands of years. And this decision to throw off those shackles was sent out as an impulse through all of creation, and whereby, like, when I received the information was roughly 2014, 2015. But again, it's outside of time. And so the reason why there was a decision made was a decision to intervene on behalf of our planet. All of this frequency suppression, all of the false light matrix, all of the infiltration and enslavement that has occurred in this world, it has occurred specifically because of how special the Earth is. The Earth is a repository. It's a living library of life and of consciousness and of genetics, and meaning that, like, the life that is here on our world, this isn't just some ordinary rock, blue ball floating around a star. This is a very, very special place. And I was told years ago, in all of the universe, there are 5 places that are like the Earth, that are a living library of life. And so what has happened is that over the eons, countless civilizations, countless forms of life have had genetics and frequencies seeded into our world. And this world then becomes like a playground of creation, where these creator God beings, human beings, us, are able to work with and steward the growth and development of life and of consciousness. And it's because of that reason that this world was hijacked and was suppressed. So this gets into the notion of free will, that there is this free will, like the law of free will, where a being has the ability to make choices to experience different types of reality. And in the case of those beings that have suppressed our world, they are making free will choices to interfere with a living library of consciousness. And for the benefit of their own growth and development, they had been allowed to go through this free will distortion for countless eons, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years in this world of suppression. And it finally reached a point where the one Prime Creator essentially made a decision that the well-being of this world exceeded the mandate that was allowed by the free will distortion of those civilizations that have suppressed us. And so this decision was made, and an impulse was sent through all of creation, essentially calling for volunteers, to come in to shift the frequency from the inside. But as well, the impulse basically authorized other civilizations to be able to come in and directly intervene on our behalf to begin supporting us. And so this is what we're seeing in our linear timeline. I was given this information, I think around 2014 or 2015, that choice had been made. And from that point forward, the star beings, like let's say the Pleiadians as an example, that they had basically carte blanche to be able to come in and directly intervene by direct removal of these suppression technologies. And that is in addition then to all of the programs that would involve the so-called star seeds that have incarnated here to shift the frequency from inside. So, that is one of the reasons why, that how special this world is one of the reasons why there was this bigger intervention that basically said, all right, like Anunnaki, you no longer have permission to suppress the destiny of this world and to suppress the purpose of this world. And we, as the embodied aspects of God, of the one prime creator, these creator God beings who we are, then have been supported in such a way that the codes latent within our DNA that were not able to be fully suppressed and removed, these codes are all coming online right now by the presence of the star beings and by the activity that's occurring from the great central sun and from our star. So it is quite the moment, and that's why there are literally, I'm told, trillions upon trillions of sets of eyes. It's an inconceivable amount of attention that is focusing on our world right now, and this is the best show in the universe. Like everybody is watching with bated breath to observe what happens as humanity on Earth and all of its life forms on Earth move through the phase shift in a way that's never occurred before.
Such an important message. And, I remember I was in my early 20s when I came across Bringers of the Dawn, and I read Barbara Mashiniak's book. And when I saw that phrase, living library, it's stuck with me ever since. There was like so much code in just that understanding of where we are. And, I know that you will agree with, the plant allies and the many natural allies on this planet, but to me, the maths all leads to keying into that living library, into opening ourselves to the allyship that sits here. And Matthew, I would definitely love to have a version 2 podcast and to pick your mind on the other allyship, the other beings that share this planet with us, the She and the Fae and the elemental beings, because I think that there is a forgotten history in terms of how their evolution is connected to our evolution. And it's something that I feel very drawn to uncovering and sharing, but we'll save that for another date if you are keen. To close off our session today, though, I would love to ask you and I really, really recommend that all of our listeners go and check out your website, because you do share quite a bit of your story on your About Us page. And there's elements that are shared there that we haven't been able to cover today. But in that retelling of the story, you shared what an incredible impact the Iboga journey and the cleanse with Rhoda and Zelkhia had on you. And what I found striking about that is that as a human that had already had such a remarkable journey to that date, that you would have such a significant experience. And I would love to know what changed for you. When I read that you said that you walked away with a greater sense of self, I would have guessed that your sense of self was already so heightened before an experience like that. How did your life change from that experience?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The arrangement of me coming in to work with this powerful plant ally, the iboga, it's actually much like my close encounter that I had, and also probably in a very direct way has driven even that experience around the close encounter. Like that this was a prearrangement for me to come into communication with this plant medicine. And I had very little working knowledge about the plant medicine at the time when I met Zelkhia in 2018. I had heard about it. I had only ever met one person that had had an iboga experience, and I met him through my other plant medicine journeys where I spent many years, I think 12 years in total, doing a deep dive with ayahuasca, including going to Peru on a dieta, and then also working with a local circle here where I live in New Mexico, where I was one of the primary helpers and facilitators for the ceremonies. So like you said, I had a very I thought at the time I had a very well cleaned out sense of myself, self with the capital S, not just the ego personality, but like I really felt like I was on the path of the embodiment of my authentic being. And when I came into contact then with Zelkhia, and I was describing some clearing that I had identified that I needed to do, there was actually a parasite that I had identified in a medicine journey, in an ayahuasca journey, identified a parasite that was anchoring in a piece of trauma around my heart. And until I removed that parasite physically out of my body, I wasn't going to be able to remove that energetic hitchhiker and the energetic distortion around my heart. And so when I met Zelkhia and I described the situation, and I said, "Is this something that the Iboga can help me with?" And she said, "Yeah, absolutely. It'll definitely help you with that." And so then I went into this experience shortly after connecting with her. I had a pre-existing set of workshops that I was going to be teaching in Scandinavia. So I had left South Africa, went home, and then when I went to Scandinavia, I had changed my flight to go from Stockholm straight down to South Africa so that I could do the cleanse the first time. And in that process, I mean, it really, there's no frame of reference that you have until you experience the iboga. It's an experience that is outside of any other type of experience that you've had. There may be some things that touch it like that, but until you've experienced it, it's even hard to convey the nature of the experience. But it was a very intense experience for me physically, where I had a lot of infiltration removal out of my body, a lot of nanotechnology, a lot of parasitic infiltration removal. And so the initial stages of that experience were very intense physically, to the point where even with all of my experience in the plant medicine, my mind was a little bit freaking out, like, oh my God, like what is going on? And when I came through the intensity of it, and I really began to connect with the medicine in that initial experience, my intention that I brought to the experience, in addition to removing the parasite, was I wanted to learn with absolute certainty who I am and what I'm here to do, so that there was no questions, no more seeking. I wanted that embodiment to be there. What I learned through this medicine is that the medicine, the iboga, is a gift to humanity. It is a gift from the spirit world to humanity. It comes from crystalline realms of light, going up and forming the top of the torus. And so it was this tree of life. And the actual alkaloid, the alkaloid that is named ibogaine, it is a special alkaloid that is contained in the root bark of the iboga tree, or it's like more like a shrub. But the bark of the roots of this plant contain this miracle alkaloid, which is the focus at a physical 3D level, that is actually a dimensional medicine. It's a spiritual compound that we are able to take into our bodies, and it facilitates a complete frequency reset while simultaneously recalibrating everything that we need to recalibrate and return to our divine crystalline blueprint. The blueprint that our soul brought into incarnation and wanted to lay out for us for this human experience. And so when you have the opportunity to take this then into your body, it goes in and it works at a physical level within the body to change and remove any of these distortions that are interfering with your ability to come into alignment with that divine crystalline blueprint. And as you do that, as you go through the experience and you make this new connection, the authenticity of who you are, the so-called higher self, it comes into embodiment. It flows through this vessel, and it's like light flowing through our vessel. And as the distortions are removed, the light comes in and it fills those spaces, and it creates this alignment then where the truth of who you are is able to come into full expression. And so the experiences that I've had then in the years since that initial experience, I've learned to grow and reconnect and embody more of who I am, which didn't happen overnight. I had a life-altering experience, the most profound experience of my life during that first cleanse. And it took me probably 2 or 3 years before I would actually even speak about the higher self, who I learned that I am. I would always speak about it as him. He told me this, etc. Meaning like I didn't yet own it. I wasn't embodying within myself. I wasn't believing that I actually could be that I was shown. And so, it's been a process. And as those energies have embodied more, as I've worked with the medicine more, I've had more opportunities to take it into my body. I've had opportunities to facilitate holding space for other people. The truth of who we are, it just floods in more and more and more. And that which does not serve us falls away very easily in a lot of cases. So it's an absolute gift. It's a complete blessing. And what I was shown was that this frequency was brought into this world specifically for the moment that we're in right now, to assist humanity in awakening itself and to release the shackles that had been overlaid on us.
Thank you, Matthew. That's such a powerful retelling, and just so clear the way that you've broken that down in terms of how that technology works.
Thank you.
And, I've done intensive work with a mushroom. And yeah, I believe that there are these certain plant allies that really have come as a gift from spirit, in terms of what they allow us to see about ourselves. But having experience listening to you, and even just upon reading your story, I'm really inspired by the power of this work that you're doing with Zelkhia and Rhoda and Rhodia. And I've experienced your medicine in other ways, and it's always been such a blessing. So to have had you here for this hour, even with all of our technical difficulties,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful, Matthew, and I have no doubt that our listeners are probably egging for more. But I know you need to go, so just want to say thank you. This has been really great.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity and grateful for the connection that we've been able to form over these years. And as we were saying, if anybody would like to learn more, I'm actually in the process of really rebuilding my website right now. And so there's going to be a lot of new information on there, but that website is GammaWave Healing. So you can go to that website. You can learn then about, the healing sessions, about the retreats that we host. And as I had mentioned to you off camera, I am returning to South Africa in September. So I will be around. There had been some contemplation. I've been kind of formulating whether or not to gather in the garden route and try to have another workshop that would be like a little one-day workshop. And so maybe we can, share that information. Maybe you and I, maybe we could come up with a game plan. But I'm very much looking forward to returning to South Africa and setting foot on the mother continent again, and really just overwhelmed by all of the love and the gratitude that I experience in journeying over there. So it's been about 1.5 years. It's been too long. I need to get back, and that's going to be in September.
Great. Well, the one-day workshop that I did with you when you were last here was just so magical. I spoke about the magic at the beginning of the podcast, just in opening up our ability to perceive it more and more, and just so grateful to you, because when one works with Matthew in this way with these workshops, the tangible experience that you have with your guides is just amazing, and it really does ground something that there just isn't enough education around, how we work with our non-human allies. And all of Matthew's details are going to be in the blurb below, GammaWaveHealing.com. It's all going to be there. So Matthew, we will keep everyone posted as your plans form for your trip. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in September.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you and your audience.